The hour was wrong for a knock that loud. Just past 2 in the morning, and the sound didn't ease me out of sleep the way an alarm might. It hit like a fist against the chest, sudden and absolute. I wasn't at some late-night gathering or living anything remotely dramatic. I was in bed in Savannah, dreaming about planting English ivy for a client whose yard was essentially a marsh. My 16-year-old daughter, Madeline, was asleep down the hall. I had heard her say goodnight at 10. Her door was closed. It was a thick, uneventful Thursday, the kind of night where the biggest worry is whether the AC holds. So when that pounding came, heavy and insistent, confusion arrived before fear. Then the lights appeared outside, red and blue, spinning across my ceiling fan like a wordless warning. I pulled on my robe and moved to the front door with my heart punching hard against my sternum. I looked through the peephole. 2 officers in uniform, faces set, posture carrying weight. I opened the door to the chain. "Can I help you?" The senior officer didn't pause. He asked if I was Danielle Vance, then told me they were there about a hit and run involving a 1967 Mustang convertible registered to my address. My mind locked up. The Mustang. My Mustang, that cherry red restoration I had poured 5 years and $65,000 into. It was supposed to be sitting in the garage beneath a dust cover, waiting for the weekend. "It's in the garage," I said, my voice still thick with sleep. "I have the keys." The officer shook his head. The vehicle, he told me, was currently embedded in the stone fountain at Lafayette Square. Witnesses had seen the driver flee on foot. Flee? From my car? Who? "We have statements," he said, his gaze drifting past me into the darkened house. "From people at the scene. They identified the driver as your daughter, Madeline Vance." The floor shifted beneath me. Madeline? The girl who gets anxious ordering takeout over the phone? The girl whose fear of hurting someone with a car had led her to fail her permit test twice on purpose? "That's not possible," I said. "She's in bed." "We have witness statements," he repeated, and this time there was an edge to it. "From Keith and Susan Vance, your parents and your sister Lauren. They were at the scene. They watched her run. My parents, my sister. At 2 in the morning, pointing a finger at my child. The betrayal didn't arrive hot. It arrived cold, the way deep wounds do. They weren't bystanders who happened to be there. They were the ones who built it. The officers left at 2:45. I didn't go back to sleep. I walked down the hall and pushed Madeline's door open just enough to see her. She was curled beneath her weighted blanket, a charcoal sketchbook resting on her chest, breathing in the slow, deep rhythm of someone who had spent her evening drawing, not joyriding through the historic district. The whole idea was absurd. Madeline was terrified of being behind the wheel. She had deliberately fumbled her permit test because the thought of causing an accident with a car kept her up at night. The notion that she had stolen a vintage convertible and gone tearing through Savannah's cobblestone streets was so disconnected from reality that it would have been almost funny had my own parents not signed the statement. I let the door rest closed again and stood in the hallway thinking about Lauren. I knew exactly where she had been, the Midsummer Solstice Festival at the Tate Estate, the kind of event where the champagne costs more than my monthly mortgage and poor decisions are buried under non-disclosure agreements. Lauren never missed it. She lived for the content it produced. For 20 years, I had been the quiet hand mopping up the aftermath of whatever Lauren left scattered behind her. When she got a DUI in college, I drove 2 hours in the middle of the night to bail her out before my father's name could show up on a police report. When she walked out of a boutique with a bracelet she hadn't paid for, I was the one who slipped back in and settled the tab before it became a story. I was the infrastructure of their reputation. She was the face. I was the machinery that kept it standing. I used to wonder why I stayed so long, why I kept letting them treat me like a resource rather than a person. The truth is that toxic loyalty doesn't collapse in a single moment. It seeps. It normalizes itself so gradually that you stop recognizing the shape of it. You don't know you've been suffocating until you try to draw a full breath and discover the air is gone. My parents raised me to believe that protecting the family's image was an expression of love. They taught me that my silence had value. Danielle, be a dear and fix this. You're the strong one. I accepted being called strong because it was the only form of praise they offered. I didn't understand until much later that strong was simply their word for useful. But tonight was different. Tonight they hadn't asked me to clean up a mess. They had manufactured one using my property and aimed it at my daughter. The Mustang wasn't just a car to me. It was a 1967 convertible I had rebuilt with my own hands over 5 years, evenings and weekends, every part chosen deliberately, every detail earned. It was my form of therapy, a physical record of everything I had constructed for myself independent of them. To Lauren, it was a prop. A vintage red accessory suited for a single Instagram post before she moved on to the next thing. She hadn't stolen a vehicle. She had stolen my peace. And then she had tried to purchase her safety with Madeline's future. I sat in the dark kitchen. The refrigerator hummed. I didn't cry and I didn't pace. I simply sat and waited for the sun. I knew the phone would ring at 8 in the morning. My parents would not call to apologize. They would call to deliver the script. At 8 o'clock exactly, my mother's name appeared on the screen. Not a text, a call. That distinction meant business. I let it ring once more, then answered without saying hello. I pressed the phone to my ear and waited. "Danielle," she began, her voice brisk and stripped of sentiment. "We need to manage this situation before it becomes something bigger. Your father is on the line as well." "I'm here," my father added, his tone carrying the same authority he used in boardrooms. "Now, we've looked at the relevant statutes. Madeline is 16. She's a minor. If she accepts the charge, the record gets sealed. Community service at most. It disappears entirely when she turns 18. I watched the steam rise from the coffee maker. They hadn't asked how Madeline was. They hadn't asked how I was. They had moved directly to legal containment strategy. And Lauren, I said. My voice had gone somewhere flat and calm I didn't quite recognize. "What happens to Lauren?" "Lauren has contracts, Danielle," my mother snapped, as though I were being obtuse. "She has a partnership with a swimwear brand launching next week. A DUI destroys her image. It triggers the morality clauses in her agreements. We are talking about significant financial exposure. So what you're asking," I said slowly, "is for my daughter, who is afraid of cars, to confess to a felony she did not commit so that Lauren can keep selling swimwear. Don't make this dramatic," my father warned. "Nobody is suggesting prison. This is a family adjustment. We protect the party most at risk. Lauren's livelihood is at risk. Madeline is young. She's resilient. She has time to recover. The party most at risk. Lauren was the asset. Madeline was the expendable variable. They weren't thinking about family at all. They were managing a portfolio. Lauren is 30 years old, I said. She drove drunk. She crashed my car into a landmark. And your solution is to let a 16-year-old absorb the legal consequences for it. It's damage control, my mother said. We'll cover the cost of the car and any fines Madeline receives. But we need a consistent story. When the police call you back today, you confirm our account. You were asleep, you heard the car go, you noticed the keys missing. Keep it clean. And if I refuse, then you are deciding to ruin your sister's life, my father said. And don't count on our support for your landscape work next season if you're not willing to be part of this family. I ended the call. I didn't slam the phone down. I simply pressed the button and set it on the counter. Then it buzzed with a notification. Instagram. Lauren had posted a story, a black background with small white-centered text. Heartbroken by the betrayal I woke up to today. Terrifying when the people closest to you turn out to be the ones who cause the most damage. Taking space to heal. She had accompanied it with a broken heart and hashtags about family trauma and recovery. She wasn't hiding. She was getting ahead of it. She was already writing herself as the wounded party in a story whose details she was keeping deliberately obscure, vague enough to be untraceable, sympathetic enough to seed doubt. I stared at my phone screen and felt something I hadn't felt in 40 years. Clarity. Not anger, not grief, just a clean and absolute understanding. I was not their daughter in any meaningful sense. I was their maintenance staff. And Madeline was not their grandchild. She was collateral, a piece they were willing to sacrifice without hesitation. They believed this was a negotiation. They thought they could buy my cooperation with next season's project funding. What they didn't know was that I had the black box. I set the phone face down on the granite and walked into my home office, closing the door behind me. The room was cool and smelled of drafting paper and good ink. This was my space entirely. This was where I managed million-dollar contracts and sat across from city councils without flinching. My family had always thought of me as a gardener who got fortunate. They had forgotten that the word architect appears in the job title. I know how to build structures, and I know how to bring them down. I opened my laptop and pulled up a name in my contacts, Jeffrey Coles. Jeffrey is not a family friend. He's a specialist in high-stakes litigation and reputation management. The kind of attorney you engage when you want the ground scorched so completely that nothing takes root there again. He picked up on the first ring. "It's been a while, Danielle. I need you on retainer, Jeffrey," I said, my voice steady in a way I hadn't planned. "I have a situation involving a hit and run, false statements to law enforcement, and defamation. The parties involved are Keith, Susan, and Lauren Vance." There was a pause. Deliberate, weighted, then the sound of pen on paper. "Your parents and your sister?" "Yes." "Are we pursuing a settlement or full exposure?" "I want total and unconditional surrender," I said. They attempted to frame Madeline. "I understand," Jeffrey said, and I heard his tone change from measured curiosity to focused precision. "I'll rearrange my afternoon. Send me what you have." "I have something more valuable than a statement," I said. "I have the black box." My parents and Lauren had made a consistent mistake when it came to me. They looked at my things and saw toys. To them, the Mustang was a gorgeous vintage backdrop for a night out, a prop that would photograph beautifully before being discarded. To me, it was a $65,000 asset that I had built from the ground up. And you don't leave an asset like that unprotected. 3 years earlier, during the final phase of restoration, I had a high-fidelity telematics system installed beneath the dashboard. It wasn't simply a GPS tracker. It was a full security suite built for collector vehicles. It logged location history, detected impacts, and most critically, included a cabin audio recorder that activated automatically whenever the engine was running or a collision occurred. I opened the security cloud portal. My hands didn't shake. I typed in my credentials. The dashboard loaded. A notification from 2:17 a.m. Severe impact detected. I opened the log. There was a high-definition audio file, 45 minutes in length, covering the drive from the estate party to the crash site and the 15 minutes that followed the collision. I could see the waveform on the screen, the peaks and valleys of captured sound. Inside that file was the truth. Lauren's voice was in it. My parents' arrival was in it. The entire plan was in it. They had believed they were in a sealed and private space. They had treated the car as a machine incapable of bearing witness. They hadn't understood that the machine had been listening the entire time. I put on my headphones and moved the cursor over the play button. I was no longer only a mother trying to protect her child. I was building a prosecution. The recording began with the engine turning over, a deep, resonant sound I had once loved that now just felt like something being armed. Then music, distorted and thumping, and then Lauren's voice cutting through it, slurred and performative. "Guys, look at this interior," she shouted over the wind noise. "Vintage everything. We are literally the main characters right now." I noted the timestamp, 2:12 a.m. She was live streaming, Jeffrey said, his voice flat as he took notes. She documented her own crime in real time. Then came the screech of tires losing grip on cobblestone, the impact of metal against stone, the audio spiking hard before collapsing into silence and hissing steam. For a moment, only Lauren's frantic sobbing was audible. "Where's my phone?" she kept saying. "Where is my phone?" Then footsteps as my parents arrived on the scene. I had expected panic. Instead, I heard my father's voice, low and composed. "Is the stream off?" Lauren said something about the car and how bad it looked. My mother cut her short. "Fix your expression. We need a story. You were never here." When Lauren pushed back, my father laid out the plan without hesitation. The car had been stolen. Madeline was 16, roughly the same height as Lauren, and her record would be sealed as a minor. Lauren's brand partnerships would remain intact. Lauren's future would be preserved. That was the moment the last piece of softness in me went somewhere I couldn't retrieve it from. This had never been about family loyalty or even misguided protection. Lauren was the golden child because she served their vanity and generated something they could display. Madeline was the scapegoat because she cost them nothing to sacrifice. It wasn't personal, it was transactional, and it was unforgivable. Jeffrey leaned back in his chair. This constitutes conspiracy to file a false police report, insurance fraud, obstruction of justice, and contributing to the delinquency of a minor. He said it the way a doctor reads a diagnosis, naming each element clearly. They aren't simply bad family members. They have committed crimes. I know, I said. We're going to help them turn themselves in. At 11 in the morning, we walked into the police station. My parents sat in the lobby with the casual composure of people waiting to be seated for a lunch reservation. Lauren positioned herself as the shaken victim. Inside the conference room, they restated their claim that they had witnessed Madeline running from the crash. Jeffrey opened his laptop before anyone could finalize anything. "Before you enter those statements into evidence," he said, "we have new material to submit." He pressed play. The cabin recording filled the room. Lauren's slurred enthusiasm about the vintage interior, the impact, and then my parents' voices, unhurried and methodical, constructing the lie designed to protect their daughter's income by destroying their granddaughter's record. The room was silent when it ended. Detective Miller stood slowly. He looked at my parents with an expression that held nothing resembling sympathy. "We're done taking your statement," he said. "Mr. and Mrs. Vance, you have the right to remain silent." My father turned to me. His voice was barely above a whisper. "You are tearing this family apart over a car. You stopped worrying about the family," I told him, "the moment you decided Madeline was expendable. You were protecting the brand. I just dismantled it." The consequences arrived fast. Lauren was charged with driving under the influence, filing a false police report, and leaving the scene of an accident. My parents were charged with obstruction and conspiracy. The audio file became public record, and journalists located the transcript within hours. Lauren's talent agency dropped her before the day ended. Her sponsorships dissolved. The beach house deposit she had made that spring was forfeited. Jeffrey filed the civil suit, and my parents settled privately for $150,000, a quiet payment for the architecture of their own undoing. 6 months later, I was sitting in my garden. My parents had sold their estate and relocated, trying to outrun the coverage. Lauren had moved to Atlanta, attempting to rebuild her life under less scrutiny. I hadn't spoken to any of them since we left the police station. Madeline sat nearby with a canvas and a brush, painting without urgency, no longer carrying the weight of being the family's designated sacrifice. The quiet between us felt like something physical, like space that had been occupied for so long that you had forgotten it could belong to you. I had spent years convincing myself that walking away from family would hollow me out. What I found instead was that it created room to breathe and to think, and to simply exist without bracing for the next crisis I would be expected to absorb and resolve. I had stopped trying to repair things that were never my responsibility to fix. I had built something real instead, a life with actual walls, boundaries that held, a space inside which the two of us were genuinely safe. I sold the Mustang for scrap. I didn't need it restored. I didn't need it as a symbol anymore. I wasn't trying to prove anything. Breaking free from a cycle that has swallowed your whole life doesn't announce itself dramatically. It sounds like a brush moving across canvas. It sounds like a long exhale. It sounds exactly like freedom.